Good morning and welcome to the webinar Multi-Channel Mobility, How to Integrate Phone, Tablet and Desktop into One Strategy. I'm Tom Hutchins, Marketing Manager for Magic Software UK, Ireland and Nordics. So, why do we need a multi-channel mobile strategy? Why is it that we don't simply want to have desktop and mobile? It's really what we're going to be discussing today is what multi-channel really means, why it's important, and how it can help in a multitude of business scenarios. To start with, we have users accessing data from a wide range of devices and architectures. So back in the old days, users were accessing on mainframe terminals, desktop PCs, and the data that they were trying to access tended to be held locally or on the mainframe. That was fairly easy to handle. In the early days of mobile, you maybe needed to get access to corporate email, a couple of websites. Now the world's changing considerably. We not only have still terminals, desktop PCs, laptops, but also tablets, smartphones. We access a lot of information through web browsers and increasingly through social media and apps. Plus, the data we're trying to access is also very different. Again, we still have mainframes and local data, but increasingly companies have their information in cloud services, and often a range of them, as well as having far less homogeneous IT environments. Not long ago, it was very common to find organizations who proudly say, we're an SAP shop, an Oracle shop, a Microsoft shop, and it really meant wall-to-wall, one supplier. Today that's just not as common, partly because with the rise of cloud services, think of things like Salesforce.com as a CRM platform, it's very easy to get short-term or annual renewing subscriptions to services that you don't need to spend a lot of time and effort getting physical infrastructure into your own sites, so it's much easier to switch between them. But also, organizations are finding that many of these services, particularly as they're very customizable, can handle their specific requirements in that area better than a wall-to-wall strategy would. So one of the reasons we need multi-channel is because we simply have so many different types of devices and so many different types of data. It's all about getting access to our workflows and data and the business logic wherever we are, whatever we're using. And that piece about workflow is critical because it's about function across channels. So our data in back-end systems isn't adapted or integrated or particularly ready to work across multiple devices. That's why this isn't just about HTML5. HTML5 is a fantastic tool, and it's becoming more mature all the time, and certainly you can do a lot with it. But what it can't do is deal with context and functionality. HTML5 is great, but we really want to talk about channels. And that's because context is very important. So, just to define a few terms. First, some things we really don't want to worry about. Devices, the tools that our users have, and the platform, the ecosystem that device sits in. We just don't want to worry about these things because if we have to consider what device or what platform a user has, then you're looking at remodeling applications and processes depending on what they have. Every time something new comes out, you have to re-architect it. That's just complicated. If we can deal with it without having to do this, that's got to be better. What we do want to worry about is the channel is the touch point with the user. If it's a smartphone, a tablet, or a PC, what is it that the user is actually using? Not what type of device or what ecosystem, but what shape. What can we learn about the user's context from the device that they're using? And how can we use that context to inform how the user wants to work? Because we're wanting to deliver functionality tailored to the user's context to make it as easy as possible for them to achieve their current task. So if we just take a step back to think how we actually got to this position where we're talking about contacts and channels, because not long ago we had two very different worlds. There was the user world, where smartphones and tablets were seen as consumption devices. Not even just consumer devices, but really consumption. These were not things that you could do serious work on. Serious work required a serious PC. And people really look down on smartphones and tablets. And I feel it necessary to call this out because things have changed so much in just a few years. Now, BYOD, bring your own device, or at least choose your own device from a corporate list, is something that's not surprising anymore. This is something that really a lot of users are expecting, and even in environments where BYOD isn't necessarily a policy, chances are many users will have used a personal device for work one way or another, even if it's just for navigating to a meeting. On the other hand, we have the enterprise world. This is the long legacy of the IT systems, process-driven, very structured, strong governance and control. And it's important to remember that these systems grew up that way for a reason. We don't want to just abandon all the hard-earned business logic and processes just because we have shiny new devices that we want to access them on. A lot of that structure and governance was about security of serious corporate data. We can't, legally in many cases, lose much of that structure. But we do want to give the users the freedom to work where and when they want and how they want, and to make it easy for them to accomplish their jobs. How can we bridge this gap? Let's remember what we actually want to achieve. The same functionalities, the same workflows and processes have to be accomplished, but across different channels. And the data on them has to be adapted and integrated and ready to work in multiple device types. For example, if you're using a smartphone or a tablet or a PC, you simply don't want your data to be displayed in anywhere near the same way across the different devices, for many reasons. Firstly, you've got the screen size and what that means about how you're doing your input. Smartphone to tablet, smartphone you've got one finger and a thumb maybe. On the tablet you could have 4 to 10 fingers. That's already very different, but if you consider on a desktop PC, you've got the advantage of having keyboard and mouse as well. This becomes a very complicated proposition very quickly because we're seeing that depending on what the user has, they want to work differently. On the smartphone, if you pull that out of your pocket, it's because you just want to check something quickly on the way to a meeting. If you've sat down with a tablet, you probably are sitting down, but maybe not all that comfortably. So you might not be there for very long, it's still a very portable device. And the PC, if you're using that, it's because you're really ready and in a scenario where you can do some deep dives into data. In terms of how we use devices, even taking the example of the two most mobile devices, the smartphone and the tablet, we still find that there are significant differences in how they're used. The phone is very much the on-the-go, sensor-oriented device. By sensors, I mean things like the camera, the GPS, internal gyroscope, near-field communications if you have that, Bluetooth. All of these things add up to an item which has its main utility in what it tells us about the world around us, as well as giving us the access to some corporate data at the same time. On the tablet, you've still got the sensors, you've still got the camera that you can scan things with, and increasingly with augmented reality that's going to be important. But you've got two hands, maybe a longer battery life, and that makes a device that's much easier to do collaboration and light productivity tasks with than the smartphone. Even though these are both very mobile devices, we're using them differently. And that's because of the context that requires one to be used over the other. So going into a bit more detail on that. From the smartphone to the tablet to the PC, we have very different input. We have different length of what I call frustration time. It's not just the attention span of the user, it's the amount of time the user will spend working with something that's a bit fiddly, bit complicated, not too obvious, before just giving up and going and doing it later. On the smartphone, we find that's about 2 to 4 seconds, depending on the user and the process. Basically, after 4 seconds, if it's not clear what you have to do or it's complicated, the user will put it away, do it at the office later on. Tablet, 5 to 10 seconds. You've got a bit more patience, but nonetheless, if it's complicated, put it off till later. The PC, with its ability to open multiple screens easily, multiple tabs, go between different workflows and windows very easily, and of course having the extra mouse and keyboard input, does make it the device of choice for the frustrating and boring and complicated task. Which isn't to say it's the right thing all the time, but when you have something that's difficult, you'll put up with it for more than 10 seconds until you've figured out how it works. And then talking about context, what does the device that's being used tell us about where the user is? If they've pulled out a smartphone, chances are they're in a bit of a hurry. If they've got a tablet, they might be sitting down, but they might not expect to be there for very long. And the desktop PC, chances are that they're sitting comfortably at the ergonomic desk in the ergonomic chair. They've got a while. And then the last point is really about how easy to share devices are. This isn't so much how social they are, but just how many people you can easily share a device with. On the smartphone, it's a small screen. Yes, you can take your smartphone, show the screen to a colleague. But on the tablet, you can have 2 people actually sitting at one device at the same time. And on the PC, you can have a large group in a room. The PC can easily have an external projector connected to it. So what this means for the different devices is that on the smartphone, you can read and action messages very easily. It's great for that. You can use the sensors, but you really want to limit data entry tasks. On the tablet, you want to show some message detail because you can drill down a little bit. You can action, you can analyze. You still get the sensors, and you still don't want to be doing a lot of data entry. Anyone who's done some typing on an on-screen tablet keyboard can tell you it's possible, but you wouldn't want to rely on it. As for the PC, they're fantastic for data entry. They're really built for using the keyboard for long periods of time. You've got a lovely big screen, and you can plug in a second screen if you need to. They're great for reporting and looking at dials and dashboards. You can drill down, you can open further tabs and windows and extra tasks and really multitask with a PC, whereas the smartphone is, I need to do this thing right now, I want it to be quick. So in terms of the user experience out of context, depending on where you are, you'll want a different device. And we can tell a bit about what the user wants based on where they are and what they're using. In the office, they'll be using the PC. They've got the time, they've got the inclination to look through large back-end systems, drill down, read some reports. On tablet, chances are they're still mobile but sitting comfortably. So this means maybe on the train, maybe in the airport, maybe in a cafe. They've got that time to look at some reports, look at some more detail than they would on a smartphone, but still it has to be arranged in a nice finger-friendly way because it's still very much a touch-oriented device. And on the mobile, on the go, they need to know what they need to know right now and no more. Give them the access to the task because it's important that it gets done, but make it as easy and quick as possible. And beyond all this, of course, we have the web, which is a fantastic way of getting access to information, but often not so much for workflows. The web is becoming just another kind of back-end system, if you like, that we can build mobile and multi-channel front ends onto. It's where the data sits. It doesn't necessarily mean it's where you want to be working. So a key thing about multi-channel mobile is that it offers us the possibility of developing from a single effort. And when I say single development effort, if you think about Smartphones, you've got iOS, Android. You might be interested in getting a Windows Phone application. A few years ago, BlackBerry might have still been very much on the radar. If you have to develop 4 different ways to get those 4 different platforms, that's complicated. What if you have to support the same things on tablet and desktop? And now, what if in the next few months something like Google Glass gains widespread acceptance and a lot of users are wanting to use that in their daily tasks? If you have to redevelop for that, that's complicated. That's wasteful in time and resources. There are better things that we can be doing with our time than building the same app repeatedly. Also, coming back to multi-channel, we have requirements beyond simply having a screen. It requires the data to be integrated, to be reliably accessible, to be secure, and it has to be available around the clock. The user experience has to go beyond simply an interface. It has to be intuitive and native. Native meaning working naturally with the platform, the ecosystem that the device is sitting in. It has to look right, basically. It has to be available, and increasingly it has to work offline. A bit more on that later. We have to be fast to market and to respond to changing trends. It has to be guaranteed that as things change in the future, we'll be able to quickly respond to them. Security has to be built in at the application device and the user levels. Typically that means encryption, authentication to the user, and also mobile device management or application management solutions. These just have to fit. They can't be an add-on or an afterthought that suddenly I've got an application, but in order for people to be able to use it securely, I have to build on these extra things. You really want them to be as core a piece of the platform as anything else. Management tools are critical because we're really talking about enterprise apps which have to be easily distributed and accessible by users at the moment that they need the access. We can't have provisioning times of weeks. It has to be minutes, if that. And at the same time, applications have to be monitored and controlled because in many cases you might want to know that the application's data can't be accessed from outside certain areas. It might be a country, a geographical region, certain cities, or even a particular site. And we have to be able to control not just the applications, but the device, the user, and the infrastructure behind it. And the enterprise application lifecycle isn't always the easiest thing. Often you need experienced partners to help point out potential pitfalls and offer best practice solutions. What does all this mean? We need a holistic view of mobility. We can't just say anymore, here's some devices, let's build some apps for them. We have to be able to cater for the user's context. We have to support multiple platforms, multiple devices. We want to be able to do all this with a single development effort with strong back-end integration. We need to know that security, monitoring and management tools are baked in. We need a platform that will handle the heavy lifting of the coding and leave us to simply select how we want things to display and how we want the logic to really work. The platforms are able to deal with user context. Here's how. So we have in the back end a bunch of business processes. This is the actual workflows that your users will use. These are integrated, and at Magic we offer a very powerful integration platform, Magic XPI, which is able with no coding to connect to a wide range of enterprise back-end and front-end systems. Take your data seamlessly through those processes so you can build the process. Then figure out in the presentation layer what you want it to look like in different ecosystems and different channels. The platform will handle the ecosystem part by itself. It knows if it's running on an Android or iOS or Windows, and it will accordingly display very differently depending on what system it is. But we can build in the context of the user and say, if it's a tablet, display like this. If it's a smartphone, display like this instead. And from a single development effort, we can have a smartphone and a tablet showing the same business process in a very different way, based on what we believe the user wants from their process. And in terms of how do we know what a user wants, it's not really a part of this presentation, but increasingly we're finding that organizations are actually working with their users to prototype applications and prototype processes, to just say, here's the kind of logic, here's what we're looking at doing. How do you think you'd actually use this? What do you need? And we're finding that line of business users are becoming the key drivers for change. They're able to say what it is that they actually do on a daily basis, able to say what they want and what they need. And this is becoming a very key thing for us. I mentioned offline earlier. I hardly need explaining what it is. Sometimes you and your data network simply don't end up in the same place, but you still need to do your work. How do you work when you have a mobile device and no connection? It isn't just that sometimes something goes wrong either. Network coverage outside of major metropolitan areas, either the coverage could be quite poor, or at least it could be very slow. In many rural areas, you might be on a 2G network. Even in smaller towns, a user is used to a 4G phone in the middle of a major city might find that smaller towns, they've only got 3G, and it's just not good enough, it's not quick enough. Also, sometimes you're indoors. In a big building, mobile coverage is very hard to get hold of. It simply doesn't penetrate the walls very well. And again, wireless access might not be available, either because it's expensive where you are, or simply overloaded, or non-existent. Network speed is an issue everywhere, because if you're trying to work on a slower network, then you get latency, which is what gamers always call lag. It's one of the most hated things, because what it means is that you've pressed the button for something to happen, and then you've got to wait quite a long time for your data to come back. This is really one of the key pieces behind users' concerns over cloud-based technologies. What's going to happen when it gets slow? It's going to be awful to use. At that point, it might be preferable to use it in offline mode for a while. Do your users sometimes go traveling internationally? If so, how do you handle roaming costs? Many organizations might have specific SIM cards that they hand out when traveling internationally. They might have special deals with carriers, particularly larger companies. But for many people, particularly in smaller businesses, it's just a very high cost or an opportunity cost, because that user isn't able to access their corporate systems all the time. Networks as well are increasingly becoming overloaded. It's an unfortunate side effect of becoming more mobile and connected, that we're exponentially creating more data and transmitting it. And it's thought that with the rise of the Internet of Things, by 2020, despite the fact that by then 5G networks might be becoming widespread, the sheer number of connected devices will mean that the data transmitted will be growing faster than the network's ability to expand. So at that point, your networks are just going to be getting slower and more congested. So again, often it might be preferable to work offline rather than having to struggle for access. And sometimes you're in an area like an aeroplane where you just will not have a network. What do you do in these scenarios? There are plenty of use cases of where offline access can just be handy on a daily basis. One I'd like to go into a bit more detail is that of the consultant, say, who's working on different client sites, and he's billed by the hour. So it's absolutely critical for his company and the client that the timesheets are completed very accurately. For his company, that's what they're getting their revenue based on, and for the client, they want to make sure that they're really getting what they're paying for. So, although timesheets might typically be submitted once a week, that's really not good enough to say, it's okay, just fill it in at the end of the week. And at the same time, because this is going straight into your financial systems about your revenue, you can't possibly remove the security around that system and make it a quick thing to go into at a moment's notice. Instead, it's preferable to have the timesheet tracking app work in an offline mode. So the consultant can simply, on his device, load in the jobs that have finished as they come through, and say, I worked on this project, this amount of hours, this project, that amount of hours, and it's all saved, it's all secure, it's in a locked container even on the device. No one can access that data, but at the same time, it doesn't require logging into multiple systems, and the consultant at the end of the week can just sync it back with the system, so the single login will handle the whole week, but you know that data's up to date. Plenty of other reasons, from users scanning their expense claim, so take a photo of your receipt, attach location tagging, timestamp, so you know, as the financial controller can know, that all of these expenses really do make sense and add up, and they can be processed together because they can be submitted on returning rather than, particularly when abroad on the roaming case, rather than submitting it at the time. Then we get into concurrency issues around collaboration tasks. If you have, for instance, a customer record that only one person needs to access, that's quite simple. When they're accessing it, you simply lock it, no one else can access. But what about with a collaboration tool? If you've got a SharePoint perhaps, you might well want to have your users able to work on that system at the same time. But you don't want one user to save and to have their work they just spent a while putting in suddenly vanish because someone else was working on the same thing. Instead, why not set a series of policies around timestamping and prioritizing, or even just showing where conflicts exist and allowing them to work sometimes in real time, but if they're on offline mode, you can still timestamp it, so it's very easy to figure out where conflicts occurred and what should take priority. Of course, the dilemma with offline is simply that there are many different databases that need to be talking to each other, and the vast majority of the databases are not on the device. So again, this is where a platform for the application is extremely handy, because it's able to handle talking between the devices, and with full integration you're able to build the workflow and have the required process on the device as part of the app. It's not just a front end to a web service, but actually it's a full process that's built there. I just want to talk you through 4 different examples of how a multi-channel, multi-context mobile can be useful in day-to-day working life. First example, we have Bob, who is line of business manager. He is often travelling, but at the same time his team has to make a lot of purchase orders. So he has to authorise the purchase orders manually. In the past it's been a very complicated and lengthy process because he has to go into the CRM and ERP systems and check that everything actually makes sense and that he can justify authorising it. In the multi-channel mobile world, it becomes a lot easier. With Magic, we're very easily able to build a workflow and app that when the purchase order request arrives in the ERP system, the data is validated, check that it all makes sense. activates a workflow, checks that the purchase order is actually budgeted for in the ERP system, check the budget available, check the quarter sales in the CRM system, and so that all this happens behind the scenes, and our sales manager gets one friendly screen that shows the purchase order requests that are in the system, which one he's looking at, and shows current available budget, how much has been spent, the sales forecast, and also the expected profitability. So our manager knows exactly what he's dealing with, as if he'd had to go into the systems manually to get it, but instead it's just come to him automatically, and at the push of a button he can simply say, yes, that looks good, approve, and again automatically that's checked, goes into the ERP system, and it's approved. It's seconds for approval rather than a long time and a lot of frustration. Mobile sales management is another example. Here we have our sales guy who has just made the trip to London from city several hours away, and his customer unfortunately is off sick. But he's only found this out when he's actually got there, so what's he going to do? In the old days, maybe he'd have to go home because he can't meet that customer, so waste of day. Or perhaps try to visit another customer and guess what they're up to. Now with Magic we have a slightly better option. Again, activate the workflow. Go to the ERP system, look for nearby customers. Go to the CRM, get their details. Go to Google and find distance to the customer. So what our sales guy now sees is customer information on the go. So we have a list of companies of the clients and a distance. Select one. When selecting, it drills down to a series of information about high-level information about the customer, where they are, and is able to see that actually they have a contract renewal coming up. And is able to download the contract to his iPad, take it along to the meeting, and having had all the information in advance, the meeting goes as smoothly as if he'd actually prepared for that meeting rather than the one he actually had. He gets the contract, everyone's happy. Next example is the mobile repairman. So an item has gone wrong. Maybe it's an office printer or your dishwasher. It doesn't really matter what. The point being that the repairman can simply scan the broken part, look to see if it's in stock in the ERP system, look at the contract management system to check what the customer's maintenance agreement is, looks for availability, when can it be dispatched, and can order the part there and then, generate the invoice and know when it's going to be delivered. Look for upsell opportunities, maybe extended warranty, and book the next appointment with the customer straight into the screen. You can see when his next appointments are, and all of this goes straight through to the customer immediately, increasing satisfaction levels and making it much more efficient for the repair guy. Last example is that the mobile patient record in a hospital. So here we have Fred, who's had an accident, and the hospital's produced a little augmented reality tag in the form of a barcode at the side of the bed. This can be scanned, giving whoever scans it role-based access to his patient data. Role-based means that when the nurse turns up with a smartphone, it just needs to know what to do now. Scan it and simply see what they need to do. Gives him one of these tablets, find the bottle, scans that, and the system records that that has been administered at that time. So that's a very simple role-based, I just need to do this right now. What happens when the doctor comes along with a tablet and wants to have a bit more information about what's going on? Simple. Scan the same barcode. You see the medication history, which is not just what needs to be delivered, but what has been and was it scheduled. Also have the option of starting some other processes, such as looking into the patient's records, connecting live to a radiography department if required, start the new workflow for adding medication or editing existing as needed, and because we all know that doctors have to do an awful lot of paperwork, why not make some of that easy and mobile as well? So what I'd like you to take away from this presentation is, firstly, let's start by figuring out what the process, what the workflow is that the users need to accomplish, and figure out what windows that process could have, depending on what kind of device you're using and what context you're in, and really what can be automated and where do you need input. Examine the context, figure out what sensors might be useful, and where data should be kept, whether that's temporary, in progress, or the final record. Now define the business logic. Who's the user? What are they trying to accomplish? Is this part of an existing process? What integrations might be necessary? What are the touch points? Or what actually needs to be done? Again, where can we automate? Where do we need user input? Only now should we really worry about the technology. What we should be concerned with is, what application platform are we going to use for developing this? What channels are important? Around offline, are there specific patterns that are needed? So this being the way in which the concurrency is handled. Do we need encryption or other forms of security? And then finally, let's make sure the workflow really does fit in well with this technology. So that's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening, and hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye.